Good day, everyone. My name is David Williams, Executive Director of the International Association for Energy Economics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled China's Draft Energy Policy and Its Implications for Power Market Reform. We are grateful to our moderator, Dr. Michael Pollitt, and our distinguished panelists for today's timely discussion. First, a little bit about the International Association for Energy Economics. We are the largest association specializing in the field of energy economics and provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, experience, and issues among professionals interested in the field. The organization produces 2 professional journals, a newsletter, and holds conferences and virtual presentations, along with a host of other products and services you can find at our website at www.iaee.org. If you're not already a member of the association, we welcome you to join. A few housekeeping matters in regard to today's webinar before I hand things over to our moderator. First, this webinar is being recorded for those that cannot participate in today's live event. If you have any questions for our panelists, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window and type your question. We've allocated sufficient time at the end of the webinar to address your questions. And now I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Dr. Michael Pollitt, Professor of Business Economics at the Judge Business School, University of Cambridge. Michael, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, David. And it's a great pleasure to be chairing this round table discussion on China's new draft energy law and its relevance for China's electricity market reform. I've been working for the last 5 years on China's latest round of electricity market reforms following the publication of the number 9 document of March 2015. This has moved China towards annual, monthly, and spot wholesale power markets at both the provincial and the regional level. I've been working closely with Chinese stakeholders and with energy colleagues in the British Embassy in Beijing, who have supported my visits to China and encouraged my interests in the reform of what is now the world's largest electricity sector, with about 27% share of all electricity produced in the world, and also its largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. The Chinese electricity sector possibly contributes as much as 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Anyone like myself with interest in the global energy system must be interested in China. In April 2020, this year, China issued a new draft energy law, which signals longer-term policy commitments to aspects of energy policy relevant to electricity. And it's a great pleasure to introduce my 3 distinguished colleagues who are going to lead our discussion of the implications for power market reform of the draft energy law. Professor Bai-Che is an energy economist at Tianjin University. Dr. Jun Zhu is a regulatory economist at Zhejiang University of Finance and Economics. Bai-Che and Jun and I have been working in Cambridge, England, this year on the price impacts of power market reform. And finally, I'm delighted to welcome Nancy Sun, who has very kindly stepped in to replace Chenghan Yang. Nancy is a senior partner at the international law firm Dentons LLP in Shanghai, and she has extensive experience in dealing with energy and investment law. So it's great to welcome you all to this panel. I'm going to ask each of our panelists some opening questions to guide us through the law and its implications. And I will also be checking the questions coming in from the audience. So do please be sending us in any burning questions that you have as we go on. Bai-Che, I'll start with you. So tell us a little bit about power market reform and the latest developments with pilots and power prices in China.
Yeah, it's nice to see. Since the beginning of 21st century, China's central government launched the new round of electricity market reform. The first one happened in 2002, aiming to separate power plants from grids. And the second market-oriented reform began in March of 2015, following the release of the so-called Number 9 document, aiming to build a complete, open, orderly, and competitive power market system. A series of supplementary documents have also released, aiming to facilitate the implementation of the reform. One of the core tasks of the reform is to deregulate the industrial electricity price and increase the competitive ability of China's manufacturing industry. The direct electricity trading between generators and customers in China dates back to March of 2005, when the power plant named the Ronghua Thermal Power Plant sold 0.39 gigawatt hour electricity to Jilin Graphite Company. At that time, local government needed to obtain consent from the central government agency to organize electricity direct trade. In 2013, the newly formed National Energy Administration issued a notice which granted the provincial governments to organize the electricity sector according to their needs. Following this guide, the provincial government actively engaged in organizing trade. In 2015, the central government had appointed Guangdong, Zhejiang, and several other provinces as the pilot power markets. And Guangdong and Zhejiang are two of the leading provinces in this area. We have studied the effect of the electricity reform in these two provinces in detail. The results indicated that although the reform has been billed as a market reform, it's clearly better to characterize it as a regulatory reform, as the market discounts offered by generator in the power markets has only constituted a small share of less than 4% of the total retail price reductions experienced by the industrial customers. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Thank you very much, Bai-Che. So that sort of started us off on power market reform. Jun, do you want to tell us a bit about the draft energy law that's come out recently and what it says?
Okay, let me show my slides. I can see you can see that clearly. Yes, when we talk about the China energy law, it means it's not a standalone law. It's actually an energy law system. For the China legislation of China's energy law system, it can date back to the 1988 when China has set up a Ministry of Energy. At that time, the Ministry of Energy had commissioned a research project to a task force to research what kind of energy law system we should create. And the task force has made proposals so that China should establish two-tier energy law system. On the top of on the first tier, China should create energy law. The energy law should be general, dealing with the common issue covering all the energy sectors for the coal, electricity, nuclear, renewable, etc. And for the second tier, there should be a separate sector law dealing with specific issues for each sector. But unfortunately, at last, the Ministry of Energy accepted that proposal. So that's the basic structure of China's energy law system. But unfortunately, in 1993, the Ministry of Energy is abolished. So there's no separate ministry in charge of the legislation of the energy law. But luckily, the newly established the Ministry of Electric Power and the Ministry of Coal Industry had proceeded the legislation of the electricity law and coal law. they are enacted in 1995 and 1996, and then the National Planning Commission have put forward the energy conservation law in 1996, and last for the National Development and Reform Commission, they had pushed forward the renewable energy law that enacted in 2005. So that's the basic structure of the energy law. We can see that there's a still gap for the oil and gas sector and the nuclear sector, because currently there isn't a specific law covering that sector. And last, this is the energy law draft published for public consultation in April this year. You can see here's the title for the energy law draft of each chapter. There are 10 chapters covering the general principle of energy law and the energy strategy and long-term planning, especially for the planning of the national plan and national energy planning and the regional energy planning. And for the this chapter is devoted for the energy development and conversion. It mainly dealing with the issue of the energy production and transmission, and especially it set out the optimize the energy fuel mix of the energy, especially for the relationship of the fossil fuel and non-fossil fuel. And for this chapter titled with the energy supply and consumption, is mainly dealing with energy distribution and consumption, like the demand side response and the obligation of the universal service. And this chapter is new for the newly electricity market and for the oil and gas market, and the energy security is dealing with energy reserve and the emergency response, and for this science and technology innovation chapter is dealing with the national policy to boost the science and technology innovation in the energy sector. And for the international cooperation, it has set several principles for the international cooperation for the energy. And for the last anti-government administration, it has set out basic measures for the government to engage in the administration for the energy sector. So that's a brief summary of the energy law.
Great, thank you very much, June, for that. So Nancy, finally, we're going to get to a lawyer. So perhaps you can sort of tell us a little bit about what the role of law is in China, and perhaps give us a little bit of an idea about how an energy law in China compares to an energy law in a typical OECD country, and also where does this law fit in China's legislative priorities?
Yes, thank you, Michael. As you may know, that it has been 13 years since the first draft of the energy law was published for public comment in 2007. And as you can see from June's introduction just now, it was long history. The legislative process was actually suspended from 2010 to 2015 because it is not easy to balance the interests of so many subsectors, including oil, gas, coal, thermal power, and renewable energy. And the draft is serving as a fundamental energy legislation would have to take into consideration of the interests of all the various parties concerned. And secondly, there have been continuous energy system reforms in China during the period, which must be examined through real practice before the relative policies could be written into laws. This also explains why the provisions in the draft so far is very general and lack of detailed implementation rules and regulations. It is also worth noting that the draft energy law was published by National Energy Administration. This means that it is still in the drafting process and at a relatively early stage in the legislation process. And moreover, the current draft is more about summarizing and reinforcing the reform experiences than to guide and lead the reforms. Since the reforms is still ongoing, for example, the reform about the separation of networks and operations in the oil and gas sectors, electricity marketization reform, green certificate trading, etc. We therefore trust the draft will be further improved based on the practice experiences. There are controversial voices inside the Ministry of Justice and throughout the industry wonder whether it is indeed necessary to introduce the energy law at this stage. We actually expect it might require a substantial amount of time and effort before formal legislation takes shape. Thank you, Michael.
Great, thank you very much, Nancy. So Bai-Che, back to you. So what are some of the interesting points for you in the draft energy law, and anything you take away in terms of the future direction of wholesale power markets in China?
Thank you. To be honest, most of the contents in the draft energy law are not unexpected, especially the contents related with the energy market. As the draft energy law has considered all kinds of energy forms, including coal, oil, natural gas, and electricity, its texts are bigger to some extent compared with the number 9 document issued in 2015 and the Energy Supply and Consumption Revolution Strategy from 2016 to 2030, issued in 2016, as all these laws and documents are forwarded by the National Development Commission and the National Energy Administration. We can see that some differences which may mirror the future direction of the wholesale energy market. The first and the most important one is about the scope of the energy market. Previous documents are present. The state insists on giving play to the decisive role of the market in resource allocation, restoring the attributes of energy commodities, following the laws of market economy and the development of the energy industry, and highlighting the main role of market players in promoting the energy revolution. The government aims to build a service-oriented government and improve laws and regulations to maintain market order. However, the draft energy law indicates natural monopoly business and competitive business in the energy sector should be operated separately. The slight difference indicates that the government will take more efforts to distinguish the property of the energy market business. For some business, such as electricity consumption in some remote areas, low-income population, and agricultural industries, there's no doubt to include them as natural monopoly business. But there are industries which are hard to define their property. This will be an important job of the Energy Administration Department. The second difference is that the energy law indicates various investment entities should be encouraged to participate equally in energy development and utilization activities and infrastructure construction. In accordance with the law, it confirms that the foreign investment and private companies are welcome to invest in the energy industry. Although with the development of distributed energy resources, more and more wind power and solar power plants are established. This policy incentivizes them to invest more on research and development of renewable energy, which may accelerate the development of power market and clean power. There's This is what I thought. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bai-Che. So let's move to you, Jude, and perhaps you can tell us what you think are some interesting points in the draft law, and in particular what it says about the direction of network regulation and indeed the organization of energy regulation more generally in China. You're on mute. You're still on mute.
Sorry for that. Sorry for that. I think these are two great points, especially for the fourth point, regulation of energy network. Even before the reform outlined by the number 9 document, China indeed don't have the separate regulation of the monopoly network business. Before the number 9 document, there's only regulated generation price and the retail price. What does the electricity grid company earn? Is that they just earn the difference of the regulated retail price and the regulated wholesale price times the volume. So after the number 9 document, their business model have changed according to that document. That after the reform, China formally imposed cost of service regulation for the grid company. So their revenue have changed to that, and they should report their cost information to the government authorities, and they will experience some cost auditing process, and then their revenue will equal the prudentially incurred cost plus the reasonable profits, and plus the tax, and plus the government fund for the addition. So their business have changed. So this is reflected. This is reflected in the energy law draft, that in Article 16 that it has formulated that competitive stage in the energy sector are mainly formed by the market. That means the generation price is liberalized, determined by the market, and the price of the natural monopoly stage is managed by the competent price department. That means that the grid companies will have imposed the Western style cost of service regulation. But there is a problem for the second point, that for the organization of energy regulation, that because the current energy law draft don't specify which government agency should be in charge of the price regulation. Because according to the quotas, from the quotas of the energy law, it has said the price of the natural monopoly stage is managed by the competent price department. But the question is, who is the competent price department? Let me show you a chart to illustrate this. Yeah, we can see that there is a department price and the National Development and Reform Commission. According to the energy law draft, is this department in charge of the price regulation for the grid companies? But there is another department named Department and Market Regulation, and it's the National Energy Administration. So this department is in charge of the market for the electricity market regulation. So we can see that China don't even establish the Western style independent government agency. The core problem is that there isn't a clear division of function between different government agencies, and the regulatory authority is highly fragmented among different government agencies. Even for the draft of energy law, it has not made it clear. So that's its weakness.
Thank you, June. So Nancy, as a lawyer in an international law firm, how do you read the draft energy law, and what do you think it implies for international investors in China's electricity sector?
Thank you, Michael. The draft energy law is comprised of 117 clauses and divided into 11 chapters. Even though it lacks detailed implementation rules and provisions, one can tell the government's attitude and the future direction of the energy policy from the general provisions. For example, it provides energy development and utilization shall be compatible with an ecological society, and very importantly, it emphasizes international cooperation shall be enhanced. It also highlights green, low carbon, and innovation-driven energy development. It also giving priority to the development of renewable energy, increasing the proportion of non-fossil energy, and promoting the clean and efficient use and low carbon development of fossil energy. The draft also emphasizes the fair access mechanism shall be improved for the power grid, oil and gas pipeline networks, and other energy transmission pipeline networks for facilities, which shall be made accessible to eligible energy production and sales enterprises and other market players in accordance with the law without discrimination. We therefore have seen many great opportunities for international investors, and many of foreign investors have actually already very actively participating in the, for example, green certificate trading, carbon credit trading, and investing into the renewable energy sectors and electricity sectors in China. And also we've seen a lot of interest from foreign investors in green and smart city, because that is the future trends. Everybody knows that. So we trust many international investors either with capital looking for interesting projects to invest in, or with advanced clean and smart technology might identify vast chance of investment opportunities in the market. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Nancy. So Bai-Che, let's go back to you. I'm now going to ask you sort of everyone about improvements that might be made to the draft law. So because the Chinese government clearly put this draft law out for debate, and we saw that with the previous draft, the debate went on for a very long time. So when economists think about reforming the electricity sector, we're keen on extension of markets, we're keen on more competition, more markets, new entry, pricing of externalities, incentive regulation, independent regulation of the energy sector, some of the things we've begun to talk about. So what more can be done to promote these things in China, and what more might the law say about them?
Yes, thank you, Michael. And in recent years, the scope, forms, and the trade varieties of energy markets are all increasing. Several kinds of energy markets have been set up, such as green certificate, carbon market, power spot market. The government encourages various kinds of entities to invest in the market, which has significantly increased the number of participants and the competitiveness of the market. As though the energy production and consumption revolution, currently, the government takes all kinds of measures to encourage the emergence of various new forms of business models. At the same time, considering the special characteristics of China, the state-owned capital play a dominant role in the industries which are critical to the national economic development. And the energy department is one of the capital sectors. Similar to the private owners, the government also had to consider the maintenance and benefits of the state-owned capital. In some areas, the government regulation is one part of the reform. A typical feature of China's energy market is the pursuit of the unity of the government regulation and market power, which has shown its advantages in improving the reliability of power supply in the short term. But in the long run, we have to rely on the market power to achieve long-term equilibrium and improve the efficiency of the power system. The formulation of energy law is a hard work. It has been nearly 14 years since its first draft was published. What we can do is to clarify which sectors should be competitive and which are monopolistic sectors as soon as possible. In terms of competitiveness, such as power generation and retailing sectors, we should gradually establish a free competitive market with fewer barriers to entry and confirm them in the form of laws and regulations. For example, there are many prosumers appeared due to the development of distributed energy generation. Their appearance have improved the competitiveness of the power market, but there is no relative law and rule to protect their interests. A proper policy design in advance may avoid the waste of resources and benefit the government of the power market. That's my opinion. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Bai-Che. Those are a great list of suggestions there. So June, I'm going to ask you next. You nicely laid out the sort of energy law system and all the other laws that into which the energy law sits. What do you think the draft law implies for the existing electricity law, the existing anti-monopoly law, the renewable energy law, and some of the other relevant laws in China? How do you think they might need to be revised in the light of the draft energy law?
Yeah, that's a good point. Because I have mentioned the energy law is the leading legislation for the whole China energy law system. As an inactive energy law, the second tier sector energy law will update, especially for the electricity law. This is most relevant for the power market reform. As I mentioned before, the electricity law is enacted in 1997. In that time, China even didn't start the electricity reform. So many of its provision is outdated, especially for the electricity price. There is a generation price, retail price, and bulk supply price between different networks. So that means the current market price and the network charge is actually illegal. But luckily, there isn't any enforcement for such a violation. So for the draft of energy law, the electricity law will update under the new direction of the energy law. Especially, the energy law has introduced a total new chapter on the energy market. So that means, I think from my point of view, the electricity law will introduce some content for the electricity market. There will be more detailed provision for the arrangement in electricity law. And for the renewable law, the China's renewable law just set out feed-in tariff to support the development of renewable energy. And that regime is so successful that we can see China has gained rapid development of the renewable energy. But there's a problem that because the renewable energy can obtain big subsidy from the renewable energy fund that is set by the renewable energy law. But that fund is suffered from big deficit, is not sustainable. So for the new energy law draft, there has many provisions to introduce the renewable portfolio standard. That means for the electricity retailers and for the grid companies, they must. There is a mandatory requirement that they should consume fixed percentage of renewable energy for their whole consumption. So for the renewable energy law, as a draft of new energy law, I think that the renewable energy law will change from the traditional feed-in tariff to the renewable portfolio standards. And for the anti-monopoly law, there's another issue, because under the current legal arrangement, the anti-competitive enforcement is engaged by the Chinese newly formed State Administration of Market Regulation. This is the China's competitive agency. Because before, China didn't have the electricity market, so there is not offense of the anti-monopoly law, especially for the electricity sector. But as now China has developed the electricity market, there's a problem that who should enforce for the anti-competitive offense in the energy sector? Because for the energy law draft, it's not make it clear. And from the policy document published by the National Energy Administration, he said he will enforce the anti-competitive offense. So there's a potential conflict between the two government agencies, and there's not a clear answer for this. I think this should improve. Maybe China could learn from the UK experience that let the National Energy Administration to enforce the anti-monopoly authorities in the energy sector. I think that's one of the solutions. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Jun. So Nancy, this is the last of our opening questions. So looking out into the future, what role would you like to see energy law playing in China's move towards electricity markets and incentive regulation?
Okay, thank you, Michael. Because it is the fundamental law in energy sector, it will surely have many impacts towards the industry. Since the time is very limited, I don't think we can cover all of them, but to just highlight the most important two, in my opinion. So the first great impact, I believe, is on renewable energy consumption and green certificate trading. Since 2012, China's renewable energy market has entered a very rapid expansion period. Although the renewable energy law provides for a fully guaranteed offtake system for renewable energy power generation, the actual implementation of the system encountered many obstacles in terms of policy planning, industry monopoly, and technology. The draft reinforces the guarantee consumption system. Moreover, the market participants could fulfill the minimum renewable energy consumption obligations through one of the two following ways, which are transfer of consumption volume or the voluntary subscription of green certificates. With the policy regarding the gradual reduction of the renewable energy subsidies and parity grade connection becoming clearer, the green certificate market has become more active. The green certificate refers to the electronic certificate with a unique code issued by National Energy Administration to qualified renewable power generation enterprises based on the on-grid power generated from renewable energy. Some multinationals have turned their attention to China's green certificate market. We actually expect that with the implementation of the guaranteed renewable energy consumption system, the coordination between the green certificate trading market and the consumption volume trading market will be further specified. The market demand for green certificate trading might largely increase, and the market might become far more active in the near future. And another very important impact would be the draft might also help promote the separation of pipeline networks and operations. And the current draft clearly states that the national monopoly business and competitive business in the energy industry should be operated separately, which has an important guiding role in the reform of the electricity networks as well as the oil and gas pipeline networks. Taking oil and gas reform as an example, the oil and gas pipeline network is a natural monopoly business. And the production and sale of oil and gas are competitive businesses. The reform of the separation of networks and operations in the oil and gas industry is making real. Back in early last year, opinions on the implementation of the reform of the operation mechanism of oil and gas pipeline networks was released. And in December last year, the National Oil and Gas Pipeline Network Group was incorporated, highlighting the fact that the new system of oil and gas markets have been basically formed. The industry believes that the draft energy law will achieve greater cross-industry computation, which helps the rapid transplantation of the reform experience in different fields. For example, the power system reform can draw on the experiences of network separation reform in the oil and gas industry. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. That sounds great. So we're now going to take some of the questions that have been appearing in the chat. So thank you to everyone who's been asking some questions. So Bai-Che, I'm going to ask you, somebody's asked us about the role of the NDRC in energy. So you might just want to tell us a little bit about which ministries are responsible for energy. And somebody else has followed up with a question on sort of late mover advantages of China. So can China sort of leapfrog what some OECD countries have been doing in electricity market reform because of coming late to it? Do you want to have a go at those two questions?
Yeah, no problem. For the first question, to some extent, I can say yes, but to some extent, I can say no, because the reform, the National Development Reform Commission, actually it has a lot of, it has combined a lot of the duties of different departments. Actually, China had electricity and a coal ministry before, but later some parts of it, some parts of its activities have been combined in the Reform Commission, but some of them have been combined to other ministries, just like environment protection. So it's hard to say whether the Reform Commission acts as electricity or coal ministry, but for the programs and the projects, yeah, it has the duty to approve or then its establish its construction. For the second question, China, the electricity reform of China began later than the OECD countries. It's true, and the origination idea of this reform is that with the economic development of China, the cost of labor has improved significantly. And about just 30 years ago, the cost and just the the cost of the manufacturing industry is low, comparatively lower than most developed countries. But after the improvement of the labor wages and the cost of other things, and later about now, as we can see, the cost of the fuel and power has been an obstacle to improve the competitiveness of China's manufacturing industry. And in 2002, we have compared in our working paper that the electricity price of China for the industrial and commercial customers is about 1.9 times of that in America, especially in Texas and California. And in this way, because China wants to improve its competitiveness of the competitive ability of its manufacturing industry, I think that's the most important reason for China to carry out the power market reform. And in our working paper, you can download it from EPRG website of University of Cambridge. We have studied that after the reform, especially in Guangdong and Zhejiang, the power price will Guangdong and Zhejiang for industrial and commercial customers is now 1.3 times Texas and California, Florida. Yeah, in this way, we can say reform has succeeded to some extent. Yeah, that's my answer.
Thanks, Bai-Che. So, June, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions on here. We've been asked about the relationship between national and provincial regulation. So I think people have questions about does everything in China happen at the national level, or is there any capacity for provinces to do different things? And you were beginning to talk about how can China create an independent regulator? How, if you were giving Chinese government some good advice, what would you say to do? Because this has been tried before and hasn't come off.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. According to current government structure, only central government have set up regulatory agency, especially for former state electricity regulatory commission, and this agency have several regional offices in different provinces. So that means currently lots of regulatory agency is set out by the central government, but in recent years, some province has set out their own regulatory agency, but according to my observation, there's some ambiguity for their function because they don't know what to do for their regulatory business, and for some attendees has asked that can province make laws and regulate electricity sector, or federal government can do this. Actually, according to the legislative law in China, province can do this, but according to my knowledge, it's random that a province can pass some legislation regarding the law. There is only an example in Eastern Jiangsu province. They have published their provincial electricity regulation, but I don't think there's much provision for the regulatory business. And someone have asked that for my child that this other department mean provincial department too? No, because on my chart, the National Development and Reform Commission and the National Energy Administration, they are all central government agency, and the other department is the other department under these two agencies. They are not provincial departments. So that's the difference. But for the provincial government, there is a provincial development and reform commission, and some provinces have also created their provincial energy administration. So that's a two-tier government agency. And for the Kara Sandohot has asked that for the merger between the former state electricity regulatory commission and the National Energy Administration did not strengthen the regulator, and it's difficult to see that any improvement in the draft energy law. This is probably one on the most important issues for the progress of the electricity power market reform. That a strong independent regulator is needed, as well for transparency for the market player. Yes, I think I totally agree with you, because I think there is some institutional barrier for China to establish the independent energy regulator, because I think because China don't have made a full determination to totally transform to a market-based energy sector. And I am working on a project to have a deep research for the regulatory institute. I think if you are interested in these questions, I think you can focus on my further research. And I am visiting energy policy research group, and I think you can find in future my working paper on this topic.
Thank you, June, for the plug there. Nancy, you know, there's an important question here that people are asking about. Can we expect some provinces to move faster with reform than others? What would be the capacity of some provinces to do that? And I suppose if you know, assuming no one's listening, you know, are there any places in China that you would suggest this is a good place to make your energy investment following the most recent developments?
Okay, thank you. Great question. So first of all, I just want to supplement a little bit the comment after June's comment on the legislation. First of all, definitely when the central government issued the energy law draft, its intention is more sort of it is a national level laws rather than local level laws. So what we can understand from this law issuance is that the energy market reform is more sort of will happen at the national level rather than some provinces or some cities. So, but how? Because the reason is when you look at the law, if it is a fundamental law, then it applicable to all provinces and cities. However, when we consider which province probably may as a pilot location for the energy market, it is always the case because China is such a large country and the economy development is uneven. When one of the fundamental law is issued at the national level, it doesn't mean that at the implementation level, all the province or cities are kind of qualified for implementing the new laws or new rules. As one of our panelists mentioned just now, for example, Guangdong province, Zhejiang province, both of the province, their economy is quite advanced compared to others. And I think that is why when we see the electricity market reform, it happens in that two provinces firstly. So if you talk about which province may have a better chance for the investment, in particular for the foreign investor, I would say probably look at the province or the cities which has a strong economy. For example, definitely if you look at the first tier city, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen, and also the province I mentioned just now, Guangdong province and Zhejiang province, because the market is kind of open up, we'll say more mature or more open up than other place. Probably that will be the key focus for the foreign investors. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Nancy. That was great. Bai-Che, I'm going to come back to you. A lot of people on the chat are asking questions about what the implication of recent developments are for cross subsidies in electricity. And we know that there has been a history of keeping the residential price down relative to the industrial price, and as has been mentioned, the industrial price has been historically quite high. How do you see that playing out in the future?
Yeah, it's true that for cross subsidy is a big issue in China, and there are a few countries just like China. The household price, electricity price is lower than industrial and commercial industries. But after the electricity reform, this cross subsidy policy has been changed to some extent. And before, just like the price block for households in China, because at first in 2011, the government has said 80% people will be in the first block. But with the economic development, more and more households will use more electricity. And now the percentage has decreased to about 70 or 60% in some provinces. In the past 10 years, the electricity price for the households hasn't changed, but actually it has increased to some extent because more and more families have entered the second block. But for the industrial and commercial customers, the price has decreased significantly, just like our paper indicated in Guangdong and Zhejiang for the 35 kilowatt customers, the price has decreased about 30%. In this way, in about 2017, and the electricity price of households in Guangdong has surpassed the price of industrial and commercial customers. This is the first time for China in its history. And of course, there are also a lot of other cross subsidies in different industries, but I can say, it's safely to say that cross subsidies will become smaller and smaller. It is in the proper way to eliminate and reduce it. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Thank you, Bai-Che. June, I'm going to give you a final comment on, perhaps you can say a little bit about what the law implies for encouragement of interprovincial trading of electricity. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Actually, the law don't have specific provision for the interprovincial trade of the electricity. I think because there's some institutional barrier, because for as a procedure of the interprovincial trade, according to the basic economic principle of one law principle, that means current different price between current different price between among the different provinces will be eradicated. So there will be one law applied to different provinces if they engage actively for the cross-border trade, especially for the low price province, they won't be happy to see their electricity price rise, and they think they will hurt their economic development. So this is the biggest obstacle, and the central government haven't designed some specific arrangement to solve this conflict of interest. So I think that's the core issue.
Thank you very much. And Nancy, I'm going to give you the last word. Perhaps you'll say something about what opportunities you see in this.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I think probably lots of our distinguished guests may have already noticed that recently not only the new energy law draft was issued, but also the new foreign investment law was actually issued late last year, and it came into effect early this year. And all the signals sending from the central government is more sort of encourage foreign investment into China. And all sorts of a series of laws and regulations and implementation rules are sort of provide for example, the strengthening the protection of the technology and relaxing the foreign exchange control. And all those kind of measures is try to provide more convenience to the foreign investment. So I would say, first of all, in energy sector, with the better investment environment, the foreign investors in energy sector will have a better chance than before. And also, some of you may also kind of notice that the new infrastructure plan was issued recently by Chinese government. And I noticed that one of our guests asked this question as well. Actually, the new infrastructure plan also create some great opportunities for not only the local investors, but also the foreign investors as well. And also another key important market is the carbon market. Even though the economic downturn caused by the epidemic right now, we do not see the rapid development of carbon market, but still the China's national ETS drawn a lot of attention from the globe. And I believe it continues so, because the climate change is still kind of the main task for lots of countries, in particular for China. And so the carbon market is definitely a very promising market. So I would like to draw all of your attention on the opportunity in this area. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, everyone. Thank you to Nancy, to Jun, and to Bai-Che for leading such a stimulating set of discussions. And thank you to everyone who's been listening and for all your excellent comments and suggestions. And we'll certainly be very happy to try and answer the questions that are on the chat. Just to say that as you might have picked up, Bai-Che, Jun, and Chenghan Yang and I will shortly be publishing a paper on the draft energy law, and we'll try and incorporate some of people's comments into those and its implications for electricity market reform. So thank you to everybody who's been on the call, and I think I'm going to hand back to David if he's there.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Wow, what an outstanding webinar. Thank you to all of our distinguished panelists for an outstanding presentation. For those still listening, this webinar will be available on IAE's website for rewind and re-listen. If you're not a member of the association, we do encourage you to join by visiting us at www.iae.org. Thank you for attending, and I officially close this webinar.